You are about to watch the incredible true story of the American Revolution, the war that gave birth to the United States of America and dismantled the established hierarchies of the 18th century world. By the summer of 1775, the tactical situation in Boston had reached a breaking point. Recent skirmishes had turned localized colonial protests into an unavoidable shooting war. On the surface, the rebellion looked formidable. Thousands of armed colonists had surrounded the British, creating the appearance of a powerful, unified blockade. But the logistics told a different story. The colonies had men, but lacked a national army. There was no professional command structure, no reliable supply of gunpowder, and no centralized food distribution. Political friction further weakened the effort. The 13 colonies operated as independent entities, often prioritizing their own regional interests over the needs of their neighbors. Without an immediate military structure and a single leader to enforce it, this massive colonial gathering was likely to collapse from its own internal chaos before the British launched a counteroffensive. On June 15, 1775, the Continental Congress attempted to fill that vacuum. They chose George Washington as commander-in-chief of the newly created Continental Army. Washington was a uniquely practical choice. He brought years of combat experience from the French and Indian War, possessed a deep knowledge of the American wilderness, and held the political status necessary to unite the northern and southern colonies. When Washington arrived in the camps outside Boston, he found his soldiers lacked training, their equipment was failing, and many were weeks away from the end of their enlistment contracts. In the city below, the British maintained the rigid discipline of a global empire. Their professional soldiers were well supplied and highly organized, the exact opposite of the makeshift force Washington was struggling to build. Washington's first objective was survival. He had to organize a starving, disorganized militia into a professional fighting force before it dissolved entirely. The first major test occurred on the heights overlooking Boston. Colonial forces captured Breed's Hill, endangering British positions. On June 17, 1775, the British responded with a direct uphill assault, believing the militias would break when professional infantry charged. The Americans were nearly out of gunpowder. To save their ammunition, their commanders ordered them to hold their fire until the British were so close they could see the whites of their eyes. When the Americans finally fired, the volleys were devastating. They repelled the first 2 waves of the British assault, inflicting heavy casualties at close range. By the third charge, the American ammunition was gone. The colonists were forced into a retreat, leaving the hill to the British in a bloody hand-to-hand struggle. The British won the hill, but the cost was staggering. The high number of officers and soldiers killed or wounded ended any hope of a quick, simple victory for the crown. For the colonists, the battle was proof of their potential. They had stood their ground against a professional army, gaining a new sense of confidence and emerging unity. Washington recognized that the situation had shifted. The defense of Boston was no longer the primary objective. The war now required a strategy for the entire North American continent. The scale of the bloodshed on Breed's Hill had effectively removed any remaining path toward a peaceful political settlement. The colonies had reached a final threshold. They had to decide if they were fighting to force a reconciliation with the king, or if they would take the final step and declare their independence. To be continued in Episode 5, The Declaration That Changed Everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to History Stories Dose so you never miss the next chapter of history.